Hello. Welcome to the Learn English Lab. Today's podcast is High Consistency is Hard in Learning English. And we're going to jump straight into the deep end today.
Absolutely. No time to waste.
Right. So I want you to close your eyes if you are safely able to do so and just picture this scenario. You're listening to this and you have just been on an absolute undeniable winning streak.
Like a really good one.
Oh, the best. For 2 solid weeks, you have been totally unstoppable. You are waking up early, pouring a cup of coffee, and immediately journaling your thoughts in English.
Which feels amazing.
It does. You're commuting to work, watching TED Talks on your phone, and you're so locked in that you've completely turned off the subtitles.
That's a huge milestone.
Yeah, and you're even catching yourself doing that magical thing. You're sitting in the middle of gridlocked, chaotic traffic in Dhaka, or maybe, I don't know, riding the subway in New York. And your internal monologue is flowing in English.
Your actual thoughts.
Yes. You're chatting on language apps, connecting with native speakers. You feel like you finally cracked the code.
It is a phenomenal state to be in. I mean, when you hit that kind of momentum, you feel like fluency is just around the corner. You're completely in the zone.
Right, you're flying high. And then, well, the crash happens.
It always does.
It's practically a law of physics at this point. It's totally inevitable. Maybe you get slammed with a brutal late-night deadline at work that completely drains your energy.
Or a massive family event suddenly takes up your entire weekend.
Yeah, leaving you absolutely no time to breathe. Or maybe sheer, unadulterated physical exhaustion just hits you like a freight train on a random Wednesday.
Which, is perfectly normal.
Totally. So what do? You tell yourself, I need a break. You skip just one day, just one single day of your pristine routine.
Which is an entirely reasonable human response to exhaustion, honestly.
It is. But then the next morning rolls around and that familiar heavy guilt starts creeping into your chest.
Ugh, the worst feeling.
You look at your phone and you tell yourself you failed. And because that guilt is so uncomfortable, you avoid the app.
Right, it's an avoidance tactic.
Yeah, so one skipped day quietly turns into 3 days. 3 days morph into a full week. And before you even realize what's happened, that expensive premium language app on your phone is just gathering digital dust.
And you're back to square one.
Back to square one, wondering what on earth is wrong with you.
It's a devastating, frustrating cycle. And it's something that almost every single person listening to this has experienced, likely multiple times.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you are sitting there right now feeling a wave of guilt about your own broken streaks, we need to let you off the hook immediately.
Please do.
If you're an intermediate or advanced learner of English, we need to completely validate the struggle you're going through, because this is not laziness.
That's so important to hear.
Let me repeat that, because it is the foundation of everything we are talking about in this deep dive. This is undeniably, without a doubt, not a lack of willpower, and it is not a character flaw.
So it's not just about trying harder.
Not at all. Today, we're tearing down the illusion that consistency is simply about trying harder. We're going to deconstruct the hidden mechanisms of why consistency is so brutally hard for you.
We're looking at the actual neuroscience.
Yes. The physical brain, the deep psychological traps your mind sets for you, and the massive global and cultural forces that actively work to throw you off track.
But we aren't just going to diagnose the illness and leave you suffering, though.
Definitely not.
Once we break all of those invisible barriers down, we are going to rebuild your routine from the ground up using a proven 3-phase strategy.
And look at real learners from all over the globe who have actually done this.
Right. So let's begin where the problem originates. We have to start with the physical hardware inside your skull. Before we can start blaming our busy schedules or, our demanding bosses or messy lives, we have to look at the biology of quitting.
The biology is fascinating.
Why does our brain seem to actively, passionately hate repetition?
Well, to really understand this, we have to look at a concept often discussed by neuroscientists like Andrew Huberman called the dopamine dilemma.
The dopamine dilemma.
Yeah, so your brain is fundamentally a survival machine. It was designed over millions of years to keep you alive in an unpredictable environment. Because of that, it's hardwired to seek out novelty.
Novelty meaning like new stuff.
Spot on. From an evolutionary standpoint, new information is incredibly valuable. A new sound could mean a predator is approaching.
Right. Or new color could be food.
Exactly. I mean, absolutely. A deeply nutritious new food source. Your brain is constantly scanning the horizon for the new, the unexpected, the sudden shift in reality.
It wants surprises.
It does. What it is absolutely not wired for is maintaining a 300-day streak on a digital vocabulary app.
Okay, so basically, our brains want to be entertained and kept on their toes, not locked into a disciplined routine.
Without a doubt, dopamine is the primary neurotransmitter responsible for reward and motivation in your brain. When you experience a quick, novel win-like, mindlessly scrolling through a social media feed.
Oh, the doom scroll.
Right, or watching a surprising 15-second video, or even just eating a piece of candy, your brain gets a massive spike of dopamine. It feels highly rewarding.
But learning a language isn't like eating candy.
It's the opposite. Especially when you're trying to push from an intermediate plateau to an advanced level. That requires a massive amount of grindy, highly repetitive tasks.
It's like conjugating irregular verbs over and over.
Yes, you're doing the exact same pronunciation drills just to fix your vowel sounds, or you're reading dense, complex articles to pick up tiny nuances in vocabulary.
And the brain just gets bored.
Totally. During those repetitive tasks, your dopamine system dulls. The reward chemical dropped off a cliff because the task is no longer novel. The brain says, I already know what this is. This isn't a new food source. Turn off the reward.
Wow. I love thinking about this in terms of thermodynamics, actually.
Okay, how so?
Trying to learn a language feels like trying to boil a massive, heavy pot of water on a flickering, unreliable stove.
That's a great analogy.
Right. You can't just turn the burner on high for 5 minutes, get a huge explosive burst of heat, and then turn it off and expect the water to stay boiling.
No, it cools right down.
Yeah. That quick 5-minute burst of heat is like that dopamine spike from novelty. It's exciting, but it fades instantly. Boiling the water, actually reaching deep fluency, requires sustained, steady, boring, repetitive energy over a very long period.
It really does.
But here is my pushback on this whole biological theory.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our brains are strictly hardwired to love novelty and actively punish repetition with a lack of dopamine, how did humans ever learn to do anything complex?
That is the big question.
Like, how did we learn to farm or play the violin or, frankly, get fluent in the second language in the first place?
You're hitting on the central friction of human learning there. The answer lies in a biological transition point called automaticity.
Automaticity.
Yes, automaticity is the holy grail. It's the point where a skill becomes so deeply structurally ingrained in your brain that you can execute it effortlessly without any conscious thought.
So like when you aren't translating from your native tongue anymore.
Spot on. The words simply appear in your mouth. But getting to that effortless state requires bypassing that awful dopamine drop-off and physically changing the architecture of your brain.
Changing the actual architecture.
Yes, and to do that, we have to talk about a specific region called the basal ganglia.
The basal ganglia. That sounds like a sci-fi villain. What is its job?
It is essentially the brain's habit center. When you first sit down to learn something new in English, let's say a complex grammatical structure like the third conditional, your prefrontal cortex is heavily engaged.
The prefrontal cortex is the front part.
Right. The conscious, thinking, energy-hungry part of your brain, it's doing all the heavy lifting, and it burns through calories and mental energy rapidly. It takes massive effort.
It's exhausting.
It is. But as you force yourself to repeat a task day after day, the brain recognizes that it is wasting too much energy using the prefrontal cortex. So it begins to hand the task over to the basal ganglia, turning it into a low-energy background program.
But that handover, that transition from the exhausting conscious brain to the effortless habit brain, that doesn't happen over a weekend, does it?
Not even close. We have to shatter a massive myth right now. There was a highly publicized study by a researcher named Philippa Lally, which looked deeply into habit formation.
Oh, is this the 21 days thing?
Yes. The common pop psychology myth that you hear everywhere is that it takes 21 days to form a habit. Lally's research found that, on average, it actually takes 66 days for a simple, basic habit to stick.
66 days!
And we're talking about something incredibly simple, like remembering to drink a glass of water every morning after breakfast. 66 days just for that.
So for English fluency.
That requires thousands upon thousands of repetitions to reach automaticity. And the reason those repetitions are biologically necessary comes down to a process called myelination.
Myelination. Okay, I want to go deep on this. Break this down for us. What is actually physically happening inside my head when I practice a sentence 50 times?
Okay, imagine the neural pathways in your brain are like billions of microscopic electrical wires. When you practice an English sentence, a literal spark of electricity travels down a specific set of those wires.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, if a wire is uninsulated, the electrical signal leaks out. It's slow, it stutters, and it loses power. Myelin is a fatty white substance that your brain produces to physically wrap around those neural pathways, insulating them just like the rubber coating on a copper wire.
Oh, that makes so much sense. So the more you practice that specific English sentence, the thicker that myelin sheath becomes around that specific pathway.
Absolutely. You are literally building infrastructure in the brain. Thicker myelin means the electrical signals cannot leak. They travel exponentially faster and more efficiently.
So that's why native speakers can just talk without thinking.
Yes, that is the physical manifestation of speed of processing. That's why a native speaker can recall a highly specific word instantly in the middle of a fast-paced debate, while a learner has to pause, stutter, search their memory, and translate.
The native speaker has thick myelin.
Right, and the learner has uninsulated wires. But building that fatty myelin takes thousands of repetitions. There is a massive, agonizing lag between the effort you put in on Tuesday and the automaticity you eventually experience months later.
Which perfectly sets up what I want to call the intermediate curse.
Oh, I like that term.
Yeah, if you're listening to this and you consider yourself at an intermediate or advanced level, this biological reality of myelination is uniquely punishing for you.
It really is.
Think about it. When you're a total beginner, every single word is novel. You learn how to say hello, you learn how to ask for the bathroom, and your brain gets a massive dopamine hit because it's brand new information.
You feel so accomplished.
Right. You figure out the difference between the present simple and the present continuous, and you feel like an absolute genius. The visible progress is huge. The dopamine is flowing. But once you hit that intermediate stage, the novelty completely vanishes.
That is the undeniable truth of the language journey. You've conquered the big, exciting basics. Now, bridging the gap from a solid B2 intermediate level to truly advanced C1 or C2 fluency requires thousands of agonizing micro-adjustments.
You're just tweaking things at that point.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. You're no longer learning whole new concepts. You're learning the microscopic difference in tone between two slightly different phrasal verbs. You're learning that look into and investigate mean the same thing, but carry totally different social weights.
And the visible progress slows down to a crawl.
Yes. And this is where delayed gratification becomes your only lifeline.
Because you're putting in huge amounts of effort, but you aren't seeing any immediate, tangible reward. It feels almost pointless in the short term.
It does. There's a well-known theory in linguistics called Krashen's input hypothesis. Stephen Krashen essentially argued that we acquire language not by memorizing rules, but by understanding messages, by getting what he called comprehensible input.
Okay, so just absorbing the language.
Right. But the critical thing to understand is that the results of that input compound over months and years, not days. So when you force yourself to sit down on a Tuesday evening to read a dense, difficult article in The Economist, your brain isn't going to reward you with a sudden leap in speaking fluency on Wednesday morning.
It's a long-term investment.
Absolutely. You're essentially putting tiny deposits into a cognitive bank account that you cannot withdraw from for another 6 months. It makes daily consistency feel completely unrewarding in the present moment.
Okay, so let me summarize this biological battlefield we are all walking onto.
Go for it.
Your primitive brain is screaming for quick dopamine hits from novelty, but mastering English demands thousands of repetitive low dopamine repetitions to build physical myelin sheaths and reach automaticity in the basal ganglia.
That's the physical reality, yes.
And because you're already an advanced learner, the obvious, highly rewarding beginner progress is a thing of the past. You are relying entirely on delayed gratification, which humans are notoriously terrible at.
We really are. That is the raw biological reality. But we have to acknowledge that biology does not happen in a vacuum. We aren't brains floating in jars.
Yo, we definitely aren't.
We are fighting our biology while navigating a highly complex, chaotic, modern world.
Which brings us perfectly to the next layer of this problem. We have to talk about the invisible war.
Yes, the psychological side.
Right. This is where your internal psychological demons and your chaotic external environment team up to completely dismantle even your best intentions. Let's start with the external pressures, specifically this concept of cognitive load.
Cognitive load is huge.
We always talk about carving out study time, but for most of you listening, daily survival is actively, aggressively competing with that study time.
Cognitive load is a vital concept to grasp. It's essentially the total amount of mental effort being used in your working memory at any given second.
Like the RAM in a computer.
Spot on. Think of your working memory like RAM. It has a strictly finite capacity for processing information. Let's look at the external realities our listeners are facing.
Okay.
If you're living in a bustling, high-intensity environment, let's say Dhaka, Bangladesh, you might be dealing with incredibly unpredictable power cuts, gridlocked traffic jams that steal 3 hours out of your day, and complex, demanding family obligations.
That's a lot of background processing.
Every single one of those external factors takes up a massive chunk of your cognitive load. Your RAM is being used up just navigating the street.
Or to look at a totally different environment, imagine you're a financial professional working on Wall Street in New York, or maybe in the city of London.
You're under constant pressure.
Right. You're pulling 60 to 70-hour work weeks. The demands on your attention are relentless. Emails, meetings, market fluctuations. Your cognitive load is completely maxed out by 2 p.m. just trying to survive your career.
And when your cognitive load is consistently maxed out, it leads directly to a debilitating psychological phenomenon known as decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue. I feel like I get that every single day.
We all do. Every single choice you make during the day drains a microscopic bit of energy from your prefrontal cortex. What shirt should I wear? Should I take the highway or the back roads? How do I phrase this difficult email to my boss?
What should I eat for lunch?
Yes, every choice has a biological cost.
I love that you brought up the prefrontal cortex again. I always picture it like the battery indicator on your smartphone.
That's a perfect visual.
You wake up after a good night's sleep and it's at a bright green, 100%. But all day long, you are running these heavy, invisible background apps. You're making hundreds of decisions, managing interpersonal stress, dealing with sudden external chaos.
And the battery just drains.
Yeah, by 8 p.m., your prefrontal cortex battery is flashing red at 2%. And this is where the massive guilt trips happen. Because at 8 p.m., you finally sit down on the couch.
And you have a choice to make.
Exactly. I mean, yes, you look to your left, and there is your English grammar book or your vocabulary podcast. You look to your right, and there's the television remote to watch Netflix.
It's a tough moment.
Choosing Netflix at that moment is not you being lazy or uncommitted. It's your exhausted prefrontal cortex, literally begging for mercy, because it does not have the biological battery power left to make the difficult choice to study.
That is such an important, compassionate reframing. We brutally judge ourselves for these evening choices, but we're essentially fighting against a depleted biological resource.
It's so true.
But external pressures and decision fatigue are only half of the invisible war. The internal traps, the things we do to ourselves, are often even more destructive, especially for advanced learners.
Let's talk about those internal mental roadblocks. Here is what is endlessly fascinating to me. Why is it that the better you get at English, the more insecure you seem to feel?
It's a huge paradox.
You'd logically think that an advanced learner, someone who can hold a business meeting in English, would be incredibly confident. But often, they're the ones who are completely paralyzed by self-doubt.
It is a profound paradox, but it is explained perfectly by a psychological concept called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Ah, I've heard of this.
In the very early stages of learning a new skill, people often experience a massive illusion of competence. Because they don't know the vast complexities of the subject, they don't realize how much they don't know.
Ignorance is bliss, basically.
Right. So their confidence is artificially wildly high. But as you cross into the intermediate and advanced stages of English, your awareness dramatically expands. You start to see the vast, terrifyingly complex reality of the language.
And your confidence crashes.
It takes a massive, painful dip because you suddenly realize just how far you still have to go to reach native-like mastery.
It's the tragedy of knowing enough to know that you are making mistakes. Like if you're an absolute beginner, you do not care at all if you mix up the words affect and effect.
Not at all.
You're just thrilled that the barista understood your coffee order. But when you're advanced, when you're writing a corporate email, making that exact same mistake feels like a glaring, humiliating failure.
You notice it instantly.
You notice the error immediately after you hit send, and it triggers a deep, visceral sense of shame. And that shame leads straight into the trap of perfectionism.
Perfectionism is absolutely paralyzing for language learners. When you're chasing this idealized, flawless version of native-like fluency, every small grammatical error or slight mispronunciation feels like definitive proof that you are failing.
Which is just so unfair to yourself.
It fosters intense, rapid burnout. The internal monologue becomes, why should I even try to force myself to practice today if I'm still messing up the third conditional after 3 years of studying?
It's an all-or-nothing mindset.
It is, and it completely and utterly destroys any hope of consistency.
And it feeds right into imposter syndrome, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You could be functioning incredibly well, communicating effectively in your job, presenting to clients, but internally you feel like a total fraud.
Indisputably.
You're constantly waiting for someone to expose your lack of perfect grammar. You completely discount your own hard-earned gains.
Imposter syndrome amplifies every single tiny mistake and brutally minimizes every massive victory. And all of these internal emotional struggles, the shame, the perfectionism, the imposter syndrome, they're compounded by a very specific psychological tendency known as temporal discounting.
Temporal discounting.
If you want to master consistency, you have to understand this concept.
Okay, I want to unpack this thoroughly. What does that actually mean for the listener who is sitting at their desk right now feeling guilty about procrastinating?
Temporal discounting is our brain's deeply ingrained, natural tendency to undervalue future rewards and vastly overvalue immediate rewards. We heavily discount the perceived value of something if we have to wait a long time to get it.
Okay, so like a marshmallow test kind of thing?
Right. Think about the ultimate goal of the listener. Deep, effortless English fluency. That is a massive, objectively life-changing reward. It could mean a promotion, a higher salary, the ability to migrate to a new country, or just profound personal connections.
But that reward is months, maybe years away.
Exactly.
There's a massive reward, but it's trapped behind a time wall. Whereas the reward of, say, scrolling through funny cat videos on your phone is immediate. It happens the exact second you open the app.
Right, there's no waiting.
But wait, let me push back on this. If our brains are ultimate survival machines, shouldn't they logically prioritize the massive future reward? A fluent English speaker gets better job opportunities, which means better resources, which means better survival. Choosing a cat video over a better future seems like a massive evolutionary glitch.
It definitely looks like a glitch in our modern, complex world. But you have to remember the ancestral environment our brains evolved in.
Back in the caveman days.
Right. In a harsh, prehistoric environment, a guaranteed calorie today was always unequivocally worth more than a hypothetical calorie next month. You might not survive until next month.
That makes sense. Take what you can get now.
So the brain evolved to grab the immediate reward every single time. And because of that lingering temporal discounting, our brains look at the massive future reward of fluency and the tiny immediate reward of scrolling, and the subconscious brain actually chooses the scrolling.
It says, I'll take the sure thing right now.
Spot on. It is the biological fuel for procrastination. You aren't delaying your study session because you're lazy or because you don't truly want fluency. You are delaying it because your brain is terrible at accurately valuing future gains compared to the comfort of the present moment.
That is mind-blowing when you really think about it. So we are walking onto this battlefield, fighting our own basal ganglia, our depleted prefrontal cortex, the massive Dunning-Kruger demon our confidence, crippling perfectionism, and an evolutionary bias toward temporal discounting.
It's a lot to deal with.
Honestly, it's a miracle anyone learns a second language at all. Which is why I want to pivot right now. We've talked extensively about the theory, the brain biology, and the psychology. Now, I want to bring this out of the laboratory and into the real world.
Let's do it.
We're going to look at the global trenches. Let's look at how consistency actually shatters for real human beings across the globe.
This is a crucial step. Moving from theory to reality shows us how universal these struggles are. We've categorized these real-world scenarios into distinct themes. Let's begin with the physical tool, the daily grind disruptors that physically destroy our routines.
Okay, let's look at Sarah. She is an accountant working in New York City. She has this grand plan to study English for an hour every night after her long shifts on Wall Street, but she consistently skips it. Why?
Circadian rhythm crash?
Yes, because of a circadian rhythm crash. Her biological body clock naturally takes a massive dip in energy in the evening. She's trying to fight a biological tide. The lesson here is that she desperately needs morning anchors. If she waits until the post-work slump, her biology will win every single time.
Then compare Sarah's situation to Ahmed in Dhaka. Ahmed used to listen to English podcasts incredibly reliably when he lived alone.
But now,
the moment he gets home from work, he's surrounded by family chaos. The kids are running around, the television is blaring, the house is loud and unpredictable. His consistency breaks entirely because of context dependency.
oh, because his brain associated studying with quiet.
Absolutely. His brain had strongly associated studying with a quiet, isolated environment. When that physical context vanished, the habit completely vanished with it. He cannot rely on silence anymore. He needs to adapt with micro habits that he can execute in the middle of chaos.
This reminds me of Tom in London. Tom tries to be super productive. He tries to listen to complex audio lessons on his daily commute, but he ends up falling asleep or just zoning out on the incredibly crowded, noisy London tube.
Which is completely understandable.
It isn't laziness. This is pure environmental overwhelm. The sheer amount of sensory input on a crowded train, the noise, the claustrophobia, the movement drains his working memory. He's fighting for a cell signal. He's fighting for personal space.
So what does he need?
He needs to download his podcasts offline so he isn't fighting technology. And he probably needs to shift his intense learning to a less overwhelming environment, using the tube just for passive listening.
We also see massive consistency failures due to extreme schedule disruptions. Look at Maria in the Philippines. She's a night shift nurse. Her sleep schedule constantly flips back and forth depending on her rotation.
Oh, that's brutal on the body.
It's the physiological equivalent of giving herself severe transatlantic jet lag every single week. You absolutely cannot enforce a rigid, unyielding, I will study every day at 8 a.m. rule when your biological clock is violently spinning.
So she needs flexibility.
Yes. She requires highly flexible study windows that adapt to her fluctuating energy levels rather than a rigid daily streak.
And it isn't just work schedules. Let's talk about Priya in Mumbai. She completely dropped her English practice, not because she was tired, but because she's currently studying for the TAT exam, which is a massive, incredibly competitive business school entrance test in India.
Ah, competing goals.
Yes, this is the stark reality of competing goals. You only have so much cognitive bandwidth. For Priya, trying to maintain a separate, intense English routine is causing her to fail at both.
She needs integration.
Right. She needs integrated study. Maybe reading her complex CAT prep materials in English, combining the two goals rather than letting them fight each other for her limited RAM.
So when you look at Sarah fighting her circadian rhythm, Ahmed fighting the chaos of his home, Tom overwhelmed on the tube, Maria battling perpetual jet lag, and Priya juggling massive goals, what is the underlying lesson here?
The ultimate insight is that physical exhaustion will absolutely every single time defeat willpower. We have this culturally ingrained idea of ego depletion, the concept that self-control and willpower are finite resources that drain over the course of the day.
And you can't just power through it.
No. If you try to force yourself to study when you're physically exhausted, sensory overwhelmed, or sleep deprived, you are relying on a completely depleted resource. You have to stop fighting your physical limits with guilt and start strategically working around them.
That is a fundamental paradigm shift. Now, let's transition to the second theme, motivation and mindset traps. This is where the physical body might be rested, but the mental game completely falls apart.
Okay, let's look at Jake.
Jake, a tech professional in Silicon Valley. Jake studied relentlessly, putting in hours a day, and he finally passed the highly difficult TOEFL exam. And then he completely stopped.
Just quit entirely.
He told himself he was taking a short break to reward himself, and he never went back to studying English again.
That is such a classic case of hedonic adaptation. He achieved this massive stressful goal. He got the huge spike of happiness and relief, but then that pleasure rapidly faded. The win just became his new normal.
Right, because his goal was external.
And because his entire motivation was tied to the extrinsic reward of the test score, the moment the test was over, the motivation vanished entirely. He had no internal reason to keep going. He desperately needed a maintenance mode plan to transition his goals from test taking to actual language enjoyment.
Then you have Javier in Mexico. Javier is obsessed with writing the absolute perfect journal entry in English. Every single sentence has to be grammatically flawless. He'll spend an hour looking up the exact right preposition.
That sounds exhausting.
It creates severe cognitive dissonance. He genuinely wants to practice, but the act of practicing causes him immense psychological anxiety because of his paralyzing fear of making mistakes.
So he just avoids it.
The tension between his desire to learn and his fear of failure causes him to eventually just avoid journaling altogether. He needs to implement strict time boxing, telling himself, I will write for exactly 10 minutes and whatever garbage comes out on the page is perfectly fine.
Let's talk about Lena in Germany. She is an advanced learner, highly competent, but she's hit a brutal plateau with her listening comprehension. She feels like she isn't improving at all, no matter how many podcasts she listens to, and she is actively panicking.
This is that Dunning-Kruger dip we talked about, manifesting in real time.
Yes. She's now advanced enough to be hyper-aware of the incredibly nuanced native speech she still cannot grasp, and it's deeply demoralizing. She cannot rely on big leaps in progress anymore. She has to start deliberately tracking micro wins to prove to her own brain that progress, however invisible it feels, is still happening.
Social comparison is another massive modern trap. Somsak in Thailand watches these hyper-fluent, seemingly perfect polyglot influencers on YouTube and Instagram.
Oh, the highlight reel trap.
Right. He compares his messy, everyday struggle to find words with their highly curated, heavily edited, perfectly lit highlight reels. The social comparison completely crushes his motivation.
It feels like he can't compete.
He feels like he will never be that good, so why try? He needs to ruthlessly unfollow those accounts if they cause distress and focus strictly on his own personal metrics of improvement over time.
And rounding out the mindset traps is Emily, a postgraduate student at Oxford in the UK. She's incredibly intelligent, deeply capable, but she's completely racked with imposter doubt.
Fearing her accent isn't good enough.
Right. She constantly questions her own accent, terrified she doesn't sound academic enough for her peers. Her internal saboteurs are screaming much louder than any actual criticism from her environment. She needs an affirming progress log to actively document her competence, to build a case file of her successes, to fight back against the irrational self-doubt.
So when you look at Jake abandoning his studies after the test, Javier paralyzed by his journal, Lena panicking over a plateau, Somsak defeated by Instagram, and Emily doubting her accent at Oxford, the underlying psychological reality becomes glaringly clear. You absolutely cannot rely on extrinsic rewards, like a standardized test score or looking impressive to your peers, to sustain a multi-year journey to fluency. To survive these vicious mental traps, you have to cultivate deep intrinsic motivation. You have to find a personal internal fulfillment in the actual act of learning itself, regardless of the external outcome.
Wow. It's a hard pivot to make, but a necessary one. Yeah. Okay, let's keep pushing into the real world. Let's look at tech, environment, and culture. This is where the wider world actively interferes with our brains. Let's start with basic, unavoidable infrastructure limits.
This is a really tangible barrier.
We have Fatima in rural Bangladesh, who constantly loses her internet connection mid-lesson, and Ali in Karachi, who deals with highly frequent, unpredictable power cuts. Their consistency isn't breaking because of a weak mindset or a lack of motivation.
It's physical volatility in their environment.
Exactly. Telling them to just use an app every day is useless advice. They absolutely must have offline kits, downloaded audio, and physical paper backups so that a power cut doesn't automatically mean a lost day of learning.
On the completely opposite end of the technological spectrum, we have digital overload. Lisa, a busy working mother in Los Angeles, has downloaded 5 different premium language learning apps on her smartphone.
5 apps, that's way too many.
She feels guilty, so she tries to use all of them. She gets completely overwhelmed by the sheer cognitive overload of managing 5 different systems, gamification streaks, and notifications, and she eventually quits every single one of them. She needs to brutally simplify her environment and focus on just one single tool.
And then there's Ji-hoon in South Korea. He has the best intentions. He sits down at his desk to practice English on his phone, but he gets distracted by a single notification. 2 hours later, he is still doom scrolling through short-form video reels. Why does this happen so easily?
The variable reward schedule.
Yes, because of the variable reward schedule. Social media algorithms are designed by neuroscientists to act identically to slot machines. You never know when you're going to see a highly entertaining video, so you just keep pulling the lever, swiping up, hoping for that next dopamine hit.
It hijacks the brain.
It completely and thoroughly hijacks the brain's reward system, leaving nothing for English study. He needs aggressive, automated app blockers activated during his study time so he doesn't have to rely on willpower.
And we cannot forget how simple travel disrupts our carefully built routines. Ben in Scotland goes on a 2-week holiday. He loses all his normal environmental cues, his specific desk, his morning commute, his regular coffee cup, and his consistency evaporates instantly because his habits were tied to his location.
So he needs portable habits.
Right. Portable, location-independent habits that he can execute regardless of where he is in the world.
But I want to pause here because the environmental hurdles are not just about smartphones or geographical locations. They are deeply, profoundly cultural. We have to talk about the social expectations that silently derail us.
Yes, culture plays a massive role.
Wai in China is dealing with strong collectivist cultural norms. He consistently, repeatedly prioritizes large family dinners and communal obligations over his solo English study time. Why? Because in his culture, group harmony and family duty often supersede individual pursuits.
You can't just ignore that context.
Telling him to just be selfish and study ignores his cultural reality. He might need to find a way to integrate group study or language exchanges so his learning doesn't feel socially isolating or disrespectful.
Similarly, we see a teenager in Texas who repeatedly skips his evening study sessions because of intense peer pressure to focus entirely on American football. The social norms of his specific high school dictate what is considered valuable and masculine, and solo academic study doesn't fit that rigid mold.
He needs a buddy system.
Yes, finding just one other peer with similar goals could help anchor his commitment against that tide of peer pressure.
We also absolutely have to address the deeply painful reality of workplace bias. Aisha, an immigrant professional working in the UK, is utterly terrified of making grammatical errors in corporate meetings. She fears accent stigma and professional judgment.
That pressure is immense.
The immense pressure to be utterly flawless in a high-stakes professional setting causes her to freeze up, become hypervigilant, and actively avoid practicing speaking altogether. She needs safe, low-stakes spaces, completely outside of her workplace, where she can make 100 mistakes a day without any professional consequences.
And we must consider the immense, crushing cognitive load of migration stress. Omar, a refugee who migrated from Syria to Australia, is trying to learn English while simultaneously trying to rebuild his entire life from absolute scratch.
Yeah, it's trauma overload.
He's dealing with profound trauma overload. His brain is actively processing an unimaginable amount of stress, grief, and logistical nightmares. For someone in Omar's position, insisting on rigid daily consistency might actually be psychologically harmful. What he needs is immense compassionate pacing.
That is the undeniable truth. You cannot force a traumatized brain to care about verb conjugation. And finally, in this section, let's talk about the modern hybrid gig worker. Someone driving for Uber in Manchester or delivering food in New York City.
They are exhausted.
They were absolutely crushed by the relentless machinery of modern hustle culture. They are working multiple unstable jobs, financially stressed, and physically depleted. For them, the advice to sit down at a quiet desk with a grammar book for an hour is practically insulting.
It's impossible for them.
It's impossible. They need to adapt by integrating passive learning listening to audio lessons during their driving gigs. It's about aggressively fitting the learning into the tiny, exhausted margins of their life.
Which leads us perfectly into the final sub-theme of these real-life scenarios, the varying faces of burnout. This is what happens when unchecked ambition violently collides with physical reality. Maya in Delhi sets a mega goal of studying for 2 solid hours every single day to pass an exam.
Based purely on willpower.
She relies entirely on ego depletion, forcing herself through sheer brute force willpower. She crashes completely within a week, feeling like a failure. She desperately needs the 1% rule, scaling her expectations way back.
Look at Raj in Chicago. He is overworking himself, trying to master high-level, complex business English strictly to get a corporate promotion. The extrinsic pressure of climbing the corporate ladder is burning him out and making him hate the language.
He has to find his internal why.
He has to reframe his goals intrinsically, finding some aspect of English culture or literature that he actually values beyond just a paycheck.
Sophie, a freelance graphic designer in London, is constantly chasing unstable income and dealing with erratic, shifting deadlines. The sheer freelance flux makes establishing a daily, rigid routine feel impossible.
So what can she do?
She needs to build in buffer times, structurally accepting that some weeks will be incredibly heavy on work and completely light on study, and that is a feature of her life, not a bug.
And we have to acknowledge seasonal and environmental burnout. This is so rarely talked about.
Yeah.
Kareem in Dhaka gets hit incredibly hard by the monsoon season.
The rain really affects him.
The constant rain, the flooding, the lack of sunlight, they cause severe seasonal affective dips in his mood and physical energy. His carefully planned routine falls apart every single year during these months. He needs specific, incredibly low-energy indoor study alternatives for those specific months rather than trying to maintain his high-energy summer routine.
And Carlos in Rio de Janeiro, who gets completely derailed every year by the massive, festive, citywide distractions of Carnival. The lesson there isn't to lock himself in his room and skip the cultural festival. It's to have pre-planned pauses and clear recovery strategies so a one-week party doesn't inadvertently turn into a 6-month lapse in learning.
Okay, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
We have just diagnosed 25 specific, granular, highly varied ways that consistency fails across the globe. From Wall Street to Dhaka, from the noisy London tube to rural Bangladesh.
It's a lot to process.
We've looked at circadian rhythms, variable reward schedules on social media, trauma overload, and hustle culture. We have thoroughly, completely dismantled the illusion that inconsistency is just you being lazy.
We have laid out the problems in exhaustive detail. We understand the biology and the environment. And now we have to pivot. Having diagnosed the myriad ways your routines shatter, what is the actionable cure?
Yes, finally.
How do we build an environment, a mindset, and a system where consistency isn't something you force through gritted teeth, but something that becomes almost inevitable?
Yes, this is the turning point. We are moving into the solution.
Yes.
Forging unbreakable consistency. We're going to give you a definitive 3-phase roadmap to rebuild your habits from the absolute ground up.
Starting with phase 1.
Phase 1 is the foundation. This is week 1. And the core principle here, which is going to sound counterintuitive, is stripping everything back to the bare minimum. You have to completely abandon the 2-hour study plans.
100%. We strongly advocate for what is called the 1% rule and the aggressive implementation of microhabit.
Microhabit.
Yes, a microhabit is a behavior so incredibly small, so laughably brief, that it requires almost zero willpower or prefrontal cortex energy to execute. If your previous goal was to study grammar for 2 hours, your new microhabit for week 1 is to review exactly one single flashcard. Just one. Or to write one single sentence in your journal. Or to listen to 1 minute of a podcast.
Okay, I hear you, but I have to ask the obvious question that everyone is thinking. If the habit is that tiny, if it literally only takes 10 seconds to do, how do you even remember to do it? It's so easy to just forget something that small.
That is absolutely why microhabits fail if they aren't paired with 2 critical psychological tools: implementation intention and habit stacking.
Implementation intention, what's that?
It's the concept of creating a highly specific, rigid if-then plan for your brain. You don't just vaguely say, I will study some English today. That requires decision-making, which drains energy. You say, if it is 7:00 a.m. and I am sitting at the kitchen table, then I will review one flashcard. You are giving your basal ganglia a highly specific environmental trigger.
And habit stacking takes that trigger a step further, right? You essentially tie the new, very fragile habit of learning English to an old, rock-solid habit that you already do every single day without fail, no matter how tired you are.
Give me an example.
So let's say you never, ever skip your morning cup of coffee or tea. You stack the new habit onto the old one. While water is boiling for my morning tea, I will review one vocabulary word. You are literally hijacking the deeply ingrained neural pathways of the established habit to bootstrap the new one.
You hit the nail on the head. To do this effectively in week 1, you need to conduct a baseline audit of your life. Take a physical piece of paper and write down everything you do reliably, automatically, every single day. Brushing your teeth, the commute to work, putting your shoes on, making coffee.
Those are your anchors.
These are your anchors. You will attach your tiny English microhabits directly to these anchors.
Okay, so phase 1, week 1, is just surviving. It's just proving to yourself that you can do the microhabit every day, attached to an anchor, without failing. That brings us to phase 2, momentum. This covers weeks 2 through 6.
The habit starts to feel normal here.
Right. Your microhabit is starting to feel normal. You aren't fighting it as much. Now you have to build walls around it to protect it from the chaos of life. And the best way to do that is by building accountability.
Accountability is absolutely crucial, especially when we look back at the cultural factors we discussed earlier. If you're living in a highly individualistic culture, like the US or the UK, learning can feel incredibly isolating, which rapidly leads to burnout.
And in other cultures.
If you're in a high-context, collectivist culture, you might feel shame about practicing publicly and making mistakes. Community solves both of these massive issues. It provides connection, it normalizes the daily struggle, and it proves that you are not alone in your mistakes.
So practically speaking, what are the actual tools for this momentum phase? How do we artificially build that community if we don't have one around us?
Start incredibly simple. WhatsApp street groups are remarkably effective. You find 3 or 4 other learners, they don't even have to be at your level, and the only rule is that everyone texts a simple thumbs up emoji to the group when they finish their daily microhabit.
That's brilliant.
That's it. The social pressure, the positive, supportive kind of social pressure keeps you engaged. Your brain does not want to be the only person in the group who didn't send the emoji that day.
I also love the idea of rainy day journals, which is a very practical concept from the UK. You literally plan for the bad days when your cognitive load is maxed out. While you're feeling highly motivated, you write a journal entry to your future, exhausted self, saying, I know you were a drain today, I know you had a terrible day at work, and you want to quit, but remember why we started this journey.
You force yourself to read it when the decision fatigue is crushing you.
And if you're someone who needs something much more aggressive to stay on track, there are accountability apps like Stick.
Oh, I love behavioral economics tools.
This app utilizes a powerful behavioral economics concept called loss aversion. Humans hate losing things much more than they enjoy gaining things. On the app, you literally bet your own real money on your success.
Wow, real money.
You pledge $50, and if you fail to meet your verified consistency goal, the app automatically donates your money to an anti-charity, a political or social organization that you actively, vehemently disagree with. The psychological terror of losing your hard-earned money to a cause you hate is an incredibly powerful motivator to keep you consistent when willpower fails.
That is intensely motivating. Okay, let's say you've survived the first 6 weeks, you have accountability, your money is safe. Now we enter the final phase. Phase 3, mastery. This is month 2 and beyond.
The habit is semi-automatic now.
You've built some thick myelin in the brain, but now we face a new danger. We need to elevate the practice so you don't hit a comfortable plateau and stop progressing.
How do we do that?
In the mastery phase, we transition from habit stacking to habit bundling. Stacking is doing a tiny habit before or during a mundane task. Bundling is specifically combining a highly rewarding, dopamine-rich activity with your study time.
Like going to the gym.
For example, if you absolutely love going to the gym, lifting weights, or going for a run, you bundle that high dopamine activity with listening to a complex English podcast. You are artificially pairing the biological reward of exercise with the linguistic input, tricking your brain into looking forward to the study session.
And what happens when the learning itself starts feeling too easy? Because that's another trap. You get comfortable reviewing the same flashcards, you feel good about yourself, and you stop actually growing.
That is perfectly when you must introduce deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is not just mindlessly repeating what you already know how to do. It is intentionally, systematically pushing your tasks to be exactly 10% harder than your current capability.
So pushing your limits.
If you are comfortable passively reading news articles, deliberate practice is trying to shadow, which means repeating aloud, word for word, at full speed, a fast-paced native speaker on a podcast. It forces your brain to stretch, building entirely new neural pathways, rather than just coasting comfortably on old, well-myelinated ones.
And to manage the immense willpower drain that deliberate practice requires, you highly recommend the Pomodoro technique. This is massive in productivity circles.
It works wonders.
You set a timer for exactly 25 minutes of intense, deeply focused, phone-away work, followed by a mandatory, non-negotiable 5-minute break. It prevents you from burning out your prefrontal cortex in one massive, heroic 2-hour session that leaves you exhausted for days.
Absolutely. Managing your energy reserve is just as important as managing your time schedule.
Now, I want to bring up something that absolutely ruins consistency in this later phase. It's the sunk cost fallacy. We see this all the time, and honestly, I've done this myself with gym memberships.
It's a common trap.
A learner gets super motivated. They buy a premium 1-year subscription to an expensive language app. They use it perfectly for a month, and then life happens, and they fall off the wagon. 3 months later, they look at the app icon on their phone, and instead of just opening it and starting again, they feel immense, crushing guilt because they wasted the money for 3 months.
And that guilt freezes them.
They feel like because they bought it, they must binge it for 4 hours a day to make up for lost time, and that immense pressure completely paralyzes them.
The sunk cost fallacy is a profound cognitive bias. You make present decisions based on past, unrecoverable investments of time or money, rather than looking at your current realities and future goals. The guilt of the wasted investment actively prevents any future action.
My major contribution to the roadmap here is the psychological power of the fresh start. You have to mentally declare bankruptcy on your past failures. Forgive yourself for the expensive app you didn't use.
Let it go.
Forgive yourself for the 3-month break where you watched television instead of studying. Today is a fresh start. Wallowing in guilt drains your precious cognitive load. Giving yourself a clean slate frees it up for actual learning.
That is a phenomenal insight. Self-forgiveness is not a weakness. It is actually a highly strategic tool for maintaining long-term consistency.
Section 5. Synthesizing the journey. We have covered an immense, incredible amount of ground today. We've talked about dopamine spikes, the basal ganglia, the crush of cognitive load, the terrifying Dunning-Kruger effect, and the trap of temporal discounting.
We really have.
Now, Let's lock this knowledge in by seeing how applying these exact strategies transforms the real lives we talked about earlier. Let's look at the success stories.
Let's revisit Tom from London. Remember, he was the one falling asleep on the crowded, overwhelming tube commute. His sensory environment was crushing his routine. He applied the strategies we just discussed. He stopped trying to force himself to read dense grammar books on the loud train.
So he shifted to passive listening.
Yes, he downloaded offline audio podcasts. He bundled his daily commute with passive listening, completely bypassing the environmental overwhelm and the need for a cell signal. By doing that consistently, his listening comprehension skyrocketed, and he eventually landed a highly competitive freelance gig with the BBC.
What an incredible turnaround. And think about Raj in Chicago. He was the one overworking himself for a corporate promotion, suffering from severe extrinsic pressure and massive burnout. He used the roadmap to fundamentally reframe his mindset.
He shifted his motivation.
It shifted from extrinsic motivation learning just for a title change and a salary bump to intrinsic motivation. He started focusing on topics in English that he genuinely personally loved discussing, like philosophy and technology. He engaged in deliberate practice, and that intrinsic drive actually led him to deliver a phenomenal talk on a TEDx stage.
Then there's Emily, the brilliant Oxford postgrad who was struggling with crippling imposter syndrome and doubting her own accent. She stopped comparing herself to an idealized native standard and started keeping an affirming progress log, meticulously tracking her daily micro-wins.
Documenting her competence.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. Documenting her competence allowed her to build a logical case against her internal saboteurs, finally giving her the confidence to speak up in her seminars.
And Kareem, in Dhaka, he didn't let the monsoon season wipe out his routine this year. He recognized the seasonal affective dip, dropped his perfectionism, and proactively adapted his habits.
He lowered the barrier.
He shifted to low-energy indoor alternatives, like watching English films with English subtitles during the heavy rains, maintaining his momentum without exhausting himself. His consistency compounded, and he eventually secured a significant, life-changing job upgrade.
When you look at Tom, Raj, Emily, and Kareem, you see the ultimate antidote to all the biological, environmental, and psychological barriers we have discussed today. And that antidote is encapsulated in a single powerful word: grit.
Grit. It's a powerful word. We hear it thrown around a lot in motivational speeches, but what does it actually mean in the context of our physical brains and our chaotic daily lives?
Psychologists define grit as long-term passion and tenacity. It's the rare ability to sustain interest and effort toward very long-term goals, despite inevitable setbacks, failures, and agonizing plateaus.
So, pushing through the hard parts.
Biologically speaking, grit is the ultimate defense against cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. When life gets chaotic, cortisol floods your system and it literally disrupts the habit loops stored in your basal ganglia. Cortisol wrecks your routines.
Oh, I see.
Grit is the psychological resilience that allows you to purposefully lower that stress response, rely on your tiny microhabits, and keep showing up even when the dopamine is completely gone.
So, we have taken you on a massive journey today. From the initial illusion of the perfect streak, down into the raw biological realities of your brain, through the invisible war of your psychology and cognitive load, into the global trenches of real-life disruption, and finally, handed you a roadmap built on micro-habits, accountability, and unbreakable grit.
We've covered a vast terrain today, but I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We've spent this entire deep dive talking specifically about the struggle to be consistent in learning English, but I want you to fundamentally reframe what you are actually doing when you sit down to study.
Okay, where are we going with this? You have my attention.
Language learning is not just about memorizing vocabulary lists or perfecting your vowel pronunciation. It is the ultimate, most rigorous training ground for your entire brain. Think about everything you have to overcome to achieve fluency.
You're battling your own nature.
You have to actively battle the primitive hardwiring of your basal ganglia. You have to strategically navigate and manage your daily cognitive load. You have to face the Dunning-Kruger effect head-on and conquer your own profound insecurities and perfectionism.
You are basically taking a sledgehammer and reprogramming your own internal operating system.
That is the undeniable truth. You are proving day by day that you can delay gratification for years at a time. So the ultimate question is this. If you can master the complex psychology of consistency in learning English, if you can build that unbreakable grit and rewire your brain's reward system, what other monumental life goals suddenly become possible for you?
Wow.
Consistency in English isn't just about language. It's about proving to yourself beyond a shadow of a doubt that you have the power to reliably shape your own future.
That is an incredible thought to end on. Think back to that flickering stove analogy we started with. You're no longer just turning the burner on high for 5 minutes, getting excited and letting it go cold. You have learned how to build a steady, sustained, unshakable fire that will eventually bring the water to a roaring boil. The tools are now in your hands. The biology is understood. Now it's time to use them. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey today. Like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel.